June 2021, I reached out to Grand Chief Noski. We knew there was much work to be done, not only for the children, but for the ones who have passed on and did not make it to see this day. The day affirmations were made about the atrocities that they knew about and carried themselves for many years. I would like to acknowledge the late Cecil Belrose and his wife. It all started with him when he reached out to me after the Kamloops story broke, and the grief was that was being felt. You know, he came to me and shared his story as he was working in the area of decommissioning of the buildings. They come across a body, and he talked to the priest about it, and they were told to be quiet about it, and must have weighed heavy within him. So that's one of the stories he shared with us as we go forward. My thoughts, prayers go out to the families whose loved ones never made it home, and who died at the hands of these so-called schools. 169 anomalies were found, with some higher confidence than others, some within the cemetery, some outside of the cemetery. But more work needs to be done. And this was only in 1 acre of that vast site. That we can start our journey of healing, rebuilding our identities that they fought so hard to take from us. The grief we felt when discovering our stolen children has opened fresh wounds. We remember the desolation of our people felt when our children were forcibly removed from their families, communities, to be placed in Indian residential schools. I would like to honor all the elders, survivors, who bravely shared their truth with us, truths that were not believed or acknowledged for many, many years. We are forever grateful for their forced sacrifice and courage. These findings that we're talking about today validated their lived experiences and are important on our long healing journey. Our little warriors have waited to find them, and now we will ensure they rest in peace. Now, we recognize the results of surveys for unmarked graves may be distressing for most, as every child matters. You know, even today, when we talk about some of this stuff, we talk about the 60 scoop. That happened by the same governmental powers that were in play at that time. Even today, we face those atrocities as Native people as we move forward within our own structures.
The knowledge of survivors and the extensive archival records already contain clear information about children dying while in residence here. The use of ground-penetrating radar and related techniques are being used to try to identify where these children are buried, including those who may not be in those records. We searched nearly 1 acre of land around the St. Bernard's Indian Residential School over 6 days, using the Canadian Archaeological Association's established best practices for single-channel ground-penetrating radar data collection when searching for unmarked graves. And the remaining anomalies were assessed by multiple analysts. As Chief Halcrow noted, 169 potential graves were identified based on analysis of anomalies within the GPR data that had characteristics associated with unmarked graves. Of these, 115 were found inside the existing community cemetery in areas with no grave markers. Due to the combination of these being inside the cemetery and some corresponding surface indications such as depressions, we can be reasonably confident that these most likely represent graves, but we cannot determine which of these may be the graves of children and which might be the graves of other members of the community. Parish records indicate children who were recorded as having died at the school were buried in the community cemetery. But as these potential graves are not currently marked and no plot maps have been located, we do not know who was buried in a specific location within the cemetery. 54 potential graves were located in other areas around the school property. While these anomalies are outside of the cemetery, they share characteristics with those within the cemetery. The potential graves in locations outside of the cemetery are currently unaccounted for in the records, but they match knowledge of survivors, including Cecil Belrose. All of these locations will warrant further investigation. We're grateful to the elders who conducted ceremony to help us do the work in a good way. We also want to thank survivors and community members who visited with us while we were conducting our painful work and shared with us their knowledge. We also recognize these results will be painful and distressing for many, especially for survivors and community members. Every child matters. One grave is too many around a school. These children died far often from their families. As someone whose family members are in the records of the children who died at the school, I feel the pain of loss of those who should have been my aunties and uncles. Each of these children was a beloved part of a family, and no one has been held accountable for their deaths. The preliminary results of Phase 1 indicate there's much more to do to find answers and bring the children home. Hi, hi.
Good afternoon, and I am Arthur Noski. I sit as the Grand Chief of Treaty 8. I am originally from Colonial River First Nation. I am honored to be a part of this, in going forward. Today marks an important day. Today our people will take another step on a long path of emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual healing and restoring our nation's spiritual well-being. As you have heard, Dr. Kisa and her team have discovered 169 anomalies that have traits associated with grave sites. This means there are 169 potential remains of Indigenous children left behind. 169 children who never made it home to their parents, grandparents, and community. As survivors of the residential school system, we're aware of the abuse and crime children endured at these institutions. Now, with ground-penetrating radar technology, the rest of the world can see the truth we've always known. These are not schools. These were not schools. They were institutions established to kill the Indian in the child. And as the number of children found in graves continues to climb, we see it was never about erasing who we are, but eradicating us altogether, genocide. When I think of those children, I feel a deep sorrow that I am not sure I can put into words. It's as if this wound cannot heal. It's reopened over and over. And when you think it will get better, it splits open again. Every day, nations and communities across this land continue to find more of our ancestors' remains. How can we heal? If we haven't found them all, how can we heal? Unless we search every single residential school site in Canada for our children. Imagine sending your child to school one day, only to never see them again. When you inquire, you are refused an explanation as to where your child is or if they are even alive. Imagine your child is missing after being sent to school. No one is looking for them, and no one seems to be bothered to care. How would you cope? What would you do? Our children have gone missing murdered only now, more than 100 years ago. 100 years later, we are beginning to understand what truly happened to them. And yet, there are many more children who will never be found, never receiving the explanation or closure we yearn for. While it's difficult to put into words how painful this work is, we will continue until every residential school site is searched for the graves of our people. We won't be able to truly move forward in our healing. We need to inform and educate the world so this does not happen again. Truth must come before reconciliation can begin. I hope the children we have found can now rest, knowing we have found them. It brings great comfort knowing they are now in the presence of God. With that, I pray for our people, for those directly impacted by this announcement today. Communities across provinces had relatives attend this school. It is not an isolated incident to Kapawe'no or the Gruard area. Children were gathered from near and far to attend this institution. And I would like to thank the churches, the bishops, for working with Chief Halcrow in providing the names that are posted on that wall. And we ask for ongoing cooperation from not only the churches, the bishops across Canada, but also with the municipalities, private landowners, and towns for where these searches have to happen. And we ask for your assistance that this would be an unhindered process for us to bring closure to this horrific history of our people. I would like to say also, back in those days, there were people being recruited from the residential schools to go to war. My uncle was one of them. To put down the atrocities overseas. And only those atrocities were happening in our backyard without the world knowing. And I know this information is very hard to, deal with at times without anger arising. But I ask for cooler heads to prevail. We have survivors listening and knowing that these wounds again are reopened. And I want to remind the survivors that there are resources available through the Indian Residential School Crisis, and it's at 1-866-925-4419. Please reach out if you are struggling. We will get through this together. Thank you.